Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar for 2024. And I'm excited to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Gideon Ndubuisi, who is an assistant professor of economics at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. He's also a senior research associate at the South African Chair of Industrial Development, University of Johannesburg, and he holds a PhD. He holds a PhD in value chains and structural chain. Dr. Gideon will be sharing a deeper insight into the incredible topic on global value chains and job creation and job destruction among firms, and his evidence is from South Africa. Take it away, Dr. Ndubuisi.
All right. Thank you. You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. For having me. I really appreciate this. Yeah. And as Mbutu rightly said, so my presentation today is going to be an ongoing work with a very wonderful friend of mine, Solomon Owusu, who is also currently an assistant professor at the Boston University in US. So this is a project that received funding from STEC, the structural transformation program that is held jointly by Groningen University and is funded by the British government. So that is a little bit about it for this project. And so the structure of my presentation is going to take this format. I'm going to start with a much broader introduction. Then I would preview some of the results that we have found so far. Then I will try to position our findings contribution to the existing literature and every other thing concerning the research design, the results, and some of the emerging evidence. I will then share it with you. Okay, so one of the ways to best see this analysis is more or less to look at it from the broader context of international trade. Now, before now, of course, there is always this great deal of argument in the international trade literature on the potential implication of international trade, especially as it concerns the welfare benefits. Now, of course, some people or some authors argues that maybe there are no welfare benefit per se. Others, of course, argue that there are also welfare benefits. So kind of like it reaches to the point whereby we can safely say that at least there are some kind of like benefit, at least in the long run. But also what is evident in the literature is that that international trade, there is always these winners and there are also these losers. And we can look at it at the country, at the sector, at the firm level, or even at the individual level. So on this premise, one can then comfortably argue that if we really want to understand what is really the potential welfare benefit of this international trade beyond the productivity effect that we normally analyze in this literature, there's always need to consider some of this cost and of course the benefits that are associated with the reallocation that is associated with international trade. Now, of course, this is more or less like an argument that spurs from when we look at the more broader discussion about international trade. But what we have seen in the recent time is that trade, the nature of trade, the nature of international trade is now really changing. So trade are no longer taking place in form of a finished good. It's more or less like intermediate goods nowadays, whereby trade are now takes place at a granular level, and countries no longer need to specialize in all the value chains of a trade. All they just need is just to specialize in a task, and then they are able to participate in international trade. Now, what this kind of like dislocation of global production has kind of like brought to limelight is that there could be some kind of like changes in terms of the productivity, in terms of the welfare, in terms of the all manner of trade that we have analyzed in the past, that can be realized from international trade. Now, if we look at it from this perspective, so what it then also means is that in recent time, the literature are now beginning to shift away just from looking at this broader perspective of international trade to now focus on global value chain, or what we call the GVC related trade, to understand what its implication is in terms of having a productivity gain or having some kind of like welfare gain. So what are these kind of things that emerges from this when we compare it to the previous to the previous trade? And of course, one, as in to put things in context, for instance, when we consider the conventional trade, it normally takes place at arm's length contracts, whereas things like the GVC related trade kind of like takes place within a vertically coordinated network. So there are like inherent differences. So the idea then becomes like, when we look at these previous ways that trade and global production takes place, and when we look at also the recent kind of trade taking place, do we really see any difference? Now, already there are several studies that have started looking at this, focusing on the productivity effect of global value chain or GVC related trade. Now, what these studies has found out is that there is an unambiguous positive relationship between GVC and productivity gains. But also what we need to understand is that, at least we have also seen it from the broader trade literature, is that this productivity gains that are associated with GVC has some kind of like reallocation cost. Reallocation cost in the sense that if when firms integrate into global value chain, of course, they are faced with greater markets and all those things, which could come at a job gain. But of course, there could also be like shrinking of firms, whereby those firms that are not productive leave the market. Of course, leaving this market also means that there is some kind of like jobs that are lost. It may also well be that in the pursuit of efficiency gains, firms in this global value chain, begin to automate or accumulate technology, which could also not really be complementary to the labor force or whatever, and this kind of like will have a shrinking effect. So there are already some kind of like theoretical argument from people like Roderick, that are already arguing that, of course, when it comes in terms of the productivity gains that is associated with global value chain related trade, there is no discussion about it. But in terms of the welfare gains as having some kind of like employment gain, that is not necessarily materializing, because most of these GVC firms, they adopt very high technology, in the pursuit of some of these efficiency gains, and then it comes at a cost of some kind of like employment and welfare gain as measured by employment gain. So based on all these kind of like arguments, so the basic objective of our paper was to understand, okay, what are the GVC effect on job reallocation at the firm level, and we are trying to understand it within the context of job creation and job destruction. So if we look at the firms that are integrated in global value chain, so what kind of like this reallocation do we see? And this reallocation, is it really giving this reallocation in the pursuit of productivity gain? Is it really creating more jobs, or is it really destroying more jobs? And to do this, we use the data for South Africa to look at this analysis. Now, if just as I said some minutes, for this analysis, we are using the firm level data that covers the universe of formal firms from South Africa from 2009 to 2017. And some of the emerging results that we find in this research is that indeed there are like job reallocation, positive job reallocation that emerges due to a firm's integration in global value chain. So, of course, based on what I have discussed earlier, what this would then mean is that there are both winners and there are both losers. Now, at the aggregate level, when we look at the full sample, one thing that came out from this analysis is that the job creation, which of course will be the winners, kind of like outweighs the losers. But there are some interesting heterogeneities that we find also in the analysis. Now, one of those heterogeneities that we find in the analysis is that the job reallocation is mostly specific to younger firms. So this job reallocation that we see in the full sample has nothing to do with the bigger firms. It is largely the younger firms that we see this kind of like job reallocation taking place. And then also another thing that we find out also in the paper when we look at some of these things is that the job creation actually materializes mostly when the firms just enter into the global value chain. Over time, if they remain in the global value chain over time, then the job destruction then kind of like takes place and not just the job. Now, so where is that? Are you talking to me?
No, apologies, Gideon. Colleagues, okay. Please mute.
So based on our analysis, we can comfortably say that our research is positioned in three key areas. So one is like the broader literature that is talking about the welfare effect of global value chain. Now, what some of these literatures have done is to look at the effect of GVC on wage and wage inequality and skill premium. So what we do here is to extend this literature by providing novel evidence that, okay, there is some kind of job reallocation that also is associated with a firm being integrated in global value chain. Now, there is also another strand of literature that uses country industry level data to examine the net effect of GVC. So this paper, so the fundamental question they ask is more or less like, okay, does GVC, what kind of like effect global value chain have on employment? So what we do in this paper is to argue that, okay, it's not just about the next change, but it's also about the job created and the job destroyed, because these two kind of things have different implications. So, for instance, when we are talking about job destruction, this largely has to do with jobs that are already existing. So that already means that, okay, we are talking about the destruction of job of people who are already in the labor market. And what this then implies is that you have already made investments, acquire education, have like some kind of like skill upgrading and the rest of it, and then your job is being destroyed. Then what that means then is that you are unable to reap the large returns from your skill investment. Of course, this kind of like have a different effect in terms of the job creation, because the job creation then becomes that, okay, there are not just new jobs created. So more or less like the employment, that the unemployment effect per se. Then the third positioning of our paper is more or less like the broader international literature that focuses on the job flows and the job reallocation, more or less like similar to what we are doing in this paper, but just that this literature, like I said earlier, is focusing on conventional trade. And as I argued earlier, conventional trade is significantly different from GVC related trade. Conventional trade takes place mostly at an arm's length contract, and there is no explicit knowledge transfer. But in terms of international trade, it takes place largely through vertically connected network, and in the most cases, there is explicit knowledge transfer from the global lead firms to the global supplies and the rest of it. So there are like inherent differences between the two types of trade. All right. Now, so that is it about the previewing and the positioning of our paper. So how then did we do this research? Now, to do this research, we used the data that is provided by the South African Revenue Service and National Treasury. So this is a custom data, like I said, that has the universe of formal firms. And it comprises two types of data set that we largely use. So the first part kind of like has information on the balance sheet of the firms. And then we have the second that is largely the custom data. Now, the custom data for us is very, very nice in the sense that it provides information on the export and the import dimension of trade at a granular level. So we have the HS code, the data has like the HS code of all the products that at the 6 units, the 6 digits that are being traded by the firms. So this gives us the opportunity to isolate those kind of like products that are considered to be GVC related. So in my view, it's a very rich data, and which I've used also in a couple of my research. Yeah, about 3 research now. Now, our analysis covers about 18,000 plus firms in manufacturing for the period 2009 to 2017. So, of course, like the data is more expansive than this, but for analysis, we focus primarily on the manufacturing firms. And after data cleaning, like dropping all the missing data points and observation with negative cells or value added, among other things, then the final sample then was about 18,000 firms. Now, one thing that we must also emphasize in this presentation is that we only considered firms that have like a minimum of 3 consecutive period. And you will see this in the next, because this has like a strong implication on how we computed the job creation and the job destruction. Now, so the first thing, of course, is how we computed or how we identified firms that are GVC. Now, in an ideal world, we would want a data that enables us to track firms through their input and output linkages, etc. But of course, this is very, very difficult. So what we did is more or less like to look at firms that trade those products that are assumed to be GVC related products. And these products are more or less like those that are innately considered to have these characteristics of being traded within a coordinated network. And to do this, we use the recent broad economic classification revision 5 that explicitly identified those kind of firms. Now, because also that one thing about global value chain is that firms normally import intermediate goods and then to export. So what we try to do is to take account of these two aspects, whereby we are considering firms that import intermediates and at the same time export this customized intermediate export. Now, because also we are not ignorant of the fact that also it may well be that when firms import these intermediates, they do not just export customized, but it could also be that they actually export final, kind of like use this intermediate to produce final goods that they export. So what we do also is to take into account the final goods aspect. So the starting point then of us identifying GVC firms is based on equation 1. So, but also to help us then in our empirical method, which is also conventional in the literature, we reduce this to a dummy, whereby we considered a GVC firm to be those firms, of course, that meet the criteria in equation 1, and those that do not meet that criteria, then we consider them to be non-GVC firms. Now, to define the job reallocation, we also follow the existing literature, whereby we take into account the sum of positive job flows across 2 consecutive periods as job creation, and the sum of negative job flows across 2 consecutive periods as job destruction. Now, because we are looking at 2 consecutive periods, so that was why in our data in our data cleaning, we ensure that we have at least a minimum of 3 consecutive periods. Because if we don't do this, then this means that of course things start getting messy in the analysis. So that was just that. Now, then to address our research question of so the equation 6 is what guides our empirical analysis, where we do different estimations for the job creation, the job destruction, and the gross job flows. So to address, of course, we are not ignorant of the fact that there could also be potential endogeneity issues. So what we then did in this paper is to estimate a structural model whereby in the first stage we predict the firm participation in global value chain, and then we use this predicted value in the second stage. Now, to preview some of our results, just as I've mentioned earlier, so this is where we look at using the full sample to look at the potential effect of being integrated in global value chain on job reallocation, destruction, and job creation. So the first thing that we see in column 3 and 4 is that actually there is a positive association between job reallocation and being integrated in global value chain. So to understand then whether this is just like in winners or versus the losers. So we look at the job destruction in column 5 and 6, and then the job creation in column 7 and 8. So what we see there actually is that there is both a job destruction and also at the same time a job creation effect. But at least when we look at when we compare and also did some kind of like statistics, so what we find out is that actually the job creation dominates the job destruction. But I said this is just for the full sample. A lot of heterogeneities begin to emerge when we look at some kind of like source sample. And one of it we consider is to distinguish between older firms and the younger firms. Now, when we look at the older firms and the younger firms, and for this analysis, we use the median year of the firms in the sample as the cutoff. And I think that was, 19 or 20. And what I must also say here is that unfortunately, the data does not have the year of birth of the firm. So, but we have information on the year the firm became a corporate organization, more or less. So that is the information that we exploit here, which of course have also been used in the literature as a proxy for firm age also. So when we use this cutoff, so what we find out is that our result for the younger firms is largely identical, at least in qualitative terms, when we compare to what we have for the full sample. So which for us then means that actually this job reallocation effect that we observe for the full sample is largely driven by younger firms, in the data set rather than the older firms. And for us also, this kind of like makes some sense in the sense that if we kind of like think about some of the reasons that underline firm integrating into global value chain, especially from the African perspective, it's more or less to gain knowledge, it's more or less for market expansions and the rest of it. And when you look at when you compare older firms versus younger firms, it seems to be that this should matter in principle for younger firms, in the sense that older firms have already run their course, they already know the market, and they have been able to survive several competitions and rest of them. So the gain then in terms of knowledge gain or in terms of achieving competitiveness through integration in global value chain now have little or no role to play in terms of the jobs they're able to keep or shed off. But we cannot really say the same for younger firms. So this is some of the argument that we think that could be driving this heterogeneity that we see when we look at when we consider the firm age. Now, similar result also emerge when we consider larger firms versus smaller and medium firms, more or less. And we hold the same also argument, since at least one thing that is conversant in the literature is that this liability of smallness and also the liability of newness, which in this case has to do with smaller firms and then younger firms, seems to be like the same type of like arguments, lacking knowledge, lacking resources, and those kind of things. And we think that is what is playing out here. Now, last but not the least, that we find even more interesting is when we differentiate GVC firms as to starters, stoppers, and continuous. Now, for this, we use two consecutive periods to track this. Two consecutive periods to track this, in the sense that we consider GVC starters as firms that were not GVC, that were not considered, that didn't really meet the criteria of GVC as we defined in equation 1 in period 1 and 2, but then in period 3 they become GVC firms. And then GVC firms, GVC stoppers being those firms that were GVC firms in period 1 and 2, but then they stopped being GVC firms after period 3. And then those firms that are GVCs throughout the sample, more or less, we consider them as the GVC continuous firms. Now, what we find out here is that for job starters, what we find out then is that being integrated into global value chain kind of like reduces job destruction and at the same time increases job creation. So there is really some kind of like job gains that are associated with this. But at the same time, we find out that when the firm stops being a GVC firm, then this alternates, and then instead of creating job, it starts destroying job, and also reducing the job creation potential of the firm. And then when we consider GVC continuous firm, we find out that actually there is some kind of, it kind of like destroys jobs, and also reduces job creation. Now, given how we defined it, so what we first assume or believe is that, okay, there is some kind of like cumulative effect that our measurement here is capturing. So based on that, how we see this result then is that when firms initially enters into global value chain, then there is, because of all those job efficiencies and the rest of it and all those things, because of all those productivity efficiency and the rest of it, then they are able to create job. But over time, in order to remain competitive and all this, which has also been argued in the literature, so there is some kind of like technology adoption and the rest of it. And then so what then this means is that there is a high potential of the number of jobs being reduced, the number of jobs being created being reduced, and at the same time, there is also some possible implication that there might be a substitution effect, whereby existing jobs are now being substituted with technology, because those firms that remain in GVC has been able to acquire technology and then substitute the existing job. So in general, we then interpret our result that the job creation benefit of being integrated in global value chain only materializes in the short run, but in the long run, there seems to be a destruction of job creation and also an increase in job destruction because of this technology, because of this technology adoption, which has been argued in the literature. So unfortunately, the data does not give us the opportunity to test some of these caveats. So the only thing we just try to do in this paper is to have that kind of like broader discussion. Now, to conclude, so what our analysis underpins is that there is a job reallocation effect associated with global value chain, whereby there are both winners and also there are both losers in terms of the productivity gains or the efficiency gain that are being associated with global value chain. At the full sample level, so there seems to be evidence that that job creation dominates, but there are a lot of heterogeneities, like I've already shown you. Heterogeneities emanating from firm size, heterogeneity emanating from the firm age, and of course also the GVC status of the firms. In terms of the GVC status of the firms, we find out that, okay, the job creation effect of GVC occurs mostly during the early stages of firm entry into global value chain, while the reduction in job destruction materializes both in the short and in the long term. Then the job reallocation effect of GVC is largely driven by young and small firms, just we have seen. So if we then put our analysis together and then situating it within the literature that have argued about the productivity gains. So what we can argue then is that GVC integration is of course associated with unambiguous productivity gains, which, by the way, I didn't present that. We also showed it in our paper, at least looking at labor productivity. However, this process generates some kind of like moderate welfare losses in terms of our analysis, job destruction, and a huge welfare gain, job creation, indicating there is some kind of like net welfare gain at the aggregate level. So in terms of policy, of course, this then stands at the intersection of labor market and at the same time trade literature. So in the sense that of course, there has really been a push in recent time, to increase firms' integration in value chain, because of the productivity gains and the opportunity to sell more and etc. So if we then to position our findings in this broader narrative, what this then means is that in as much as you as a policymaker are trying to increase the participation of firms into global value chain, perhaps through tariff reduction or through increasing their knowledge base, etc. There should also be a basic understanding there is some kind of like negative labor market effect that could also arise from such kind of like firm integration in value chain. In this case, there is a need for complementary policy in the sense that a trade policy that enables firms to integrate in global value chain, but also some kind of like labor market policy that helps to cushion the effect of this job destruction that could also materialize from being integrated in global value chain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gideon, for an insightful presentation, and your expertise have provided us with an insight into the GVCs. Now I would like to open up the floor to everyone for any comments or questions that you have for the presenter. Please feel free to put your comments and your questions through. Thank you.
Nobuntu, I see 2 hands.
Yes, I see Remembrance. Yes, you can come through, Remembrance, and pose your question or your comment.
All right. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Prof, for the presentation. It is really an eye opener to some of us that are not really, sort of, clueless in terms of what GVCs are. So, I mean, it's quite interesting what GVCs are. I mean, to me, they sort of, what comes to my mind when the presenter was talking was something that is sort of trying to, it's aligned with what maybe can be coined as an international division of labor. So it tries to sort of promote that, where countries are now sort of specializing in the production of certain goods and services, and there's a center where all of these things come together, and form one product of some sort. Now, and it seems to be something that can serve as some sort of an acceptable form of support for industrialization, right? And in South Africa, we've got industrial policy. Now, one would want to maybe sort of get a sense of how does GVC fit into an industrial policy that would normally fund as government, or or support in a form of funding, or any other thing that we can sort of support with as government, or is GVC, is it something that fits into the industrial policy, or is it something or different altogether from what an industrial policy is? Maybe one would want to understand that. Thanks.
So, Chair, shall I respond, or I don't know?
Yes, you can respond to this one, and then we'll take Spusiso after the response. Or should we take both Spusiso question or comment and answer both afterwards?
I don't know, anyone you want. You just tell me, and then I'll. But
Okay,
I mean, I can also reply to this directly, and then maybe subsequently we take two, and then I react to them.
Yes, that's fine. We can do that. You can respond to this one, and then we'll take Spusiso afterwards.
All right, okay. So thank you very much for your question. And I think your question is very, very insightful and shouldn't really be taken for granted. Now, why do I say so? So there's always this, at least, this friction or this misconception, about industrialization, global value chains, etc., especially when it comes to cluster and all those things. So in my own perspective, I don't think that they are different. So of course, some people might kind of like argue that, okay, let's go through cluster, whereby we try to promote local linkages, more, and then instead of global value chain. Then there is also the literature arguing that actually that global value chain is the route, the route of a best form of industrialization. In fact, I think Baldwin in 2012 puts it simply. He says that GVC has now become an easier route of industrialization, especially, of course, when we are talking about trade-led industrialization, in the sense that firms or countries do no longer need to build capabilities along all the value chains for them to export. All you just need is to build capacity on a specific thing. So that is it on a more broader scheme of things. But I think that both of them are linked, because global value chain could also produce some kind of like hub of some kind of like pools of external knowledge, whereby if we come within clusters, for instance, global value firms that are being integrated into global value chain could become some kind of sources of external knowledge that could spill over to other firms, within that cluster, and in that case, promote industrialization. But countries can also see global value chain as a means to also promote industrialization per se. We found we have a paper whereby we looked at global value chain and export upgrading, and what we found out is that actually being integrated in global value chain, especially through backward linkages, promotes export upgrading in the manufacturing sector. We have also have a paper which was also published, whereby we found out that actually being integrated in global value chain actually also increases productive efficiency of countries. So there is this kind of like industrial benefits that materializes from being integrated in global value chain. That cannot be argued. But what we are arguing in this paper is that amidst all this amidst all this efficiency, we should also not really be carried away that global value chain is all rosy, right? That there are no costs associated with being integrated in global value chain or pursuing global value chain as a means for industrialization. So that is, for me, what our paper is trying to bring forward, such that as you are trying to use global value chain to promote industrialization, you should also kind of like have complementary policies that enables you to exploit these benefits that are associated with global value chain in terms of industrialization, as you have put it, but at the same time helps you to avoid some of these negative labor market consequences that can also arise from it. And I think this is what our paper is trying to show.
Thank you, Gideon, and I hope, Remembrance, you've been answered. We'll take a question from Busiso.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, and good afternoon, Prof. Thanks for the presentation. Two short questions on my side. The first one, on the net welfare gain, I would be interested to get the Prof's view on sequencing. What happens first? Do they happen simultaneously? The new jobs being created and the older jobs being destroyed, the older firms going down, the new firms coming up. I'm interested in the sequencing because depending on how it's sequenced, it will become more politically palatable or less politically palatable. If the welfare gains come first and then they are reduced by the welfare losses, that, to my mind, will be more politically palatable than, say, the other way around, where you would need some sort of patience on the part of stakeholders to say, look, the welfare gains are coming, but for now, there will be some job losses. The second question I have is, you've mentioned it twice now on the policies on the labor market side. I would be interested to get the Prof's views of what those policies potentially look like. Is it a grant? Is it a guaranteed job? Is it absorption into the public service? What does this intervention look like on the labor market side? Thanks.
Yeah, okay. All right, okay. So thanks very much for the question. So in terms of the sequencing, so I must be honest, this is not what we really consider or even thought about in this paper so far, so, but it's also quite interesting on the political dimension that could be associated with, this sequencing, which totally we are ignorant about, and I appreciate you bringing it up. So I'm unable to provide direct answer to that, but at least based on the analysis that we have done, what it shows is that the what is it called? The losses comes after. So the losses comes after, at least based on how we measure it. But of course, we need to really think about more carefully whether even still at the initial time, all these things play around and then one dominates the other. That's something that we really need to think about carefully. But at least based on the level of analysis that we've done, and also as I showed it on this slide that is here, so it appears that the benefit comes first and then the losses comes after. Because what we found out is that when firms first enter into global value chain, there is this job gains. So it reduces job destruction, and then there is this job gain. But over time, when the firm stops, or for those firms that continue to be in the global value chain, then this kind of like benefit then turns around into becoming negative all throughout in terms of increasing job destruction and also reducing job creation. So if I'm then to react to your question, I would say that, okay, the benefit comes first, and then the losses comes later. But I also must proceed there with care, in the sense that we have not really like interrogated the analysis to understand critically from all these the directions. Now, of course, if I should then use this to move on to your next question on what kind of like policies then that could, that could emanate from this. I mean, what this then means is that where the policy intervention, of course, will be for those firms that have stayed long in the global value chain and in the global value chain, more or less. So what we can then think about is to perhaps provide some kind of like skills for those firms that are already there, at least on two premises. One could be that it helps them in terms of if they are shed off, they are able to find alternative employment, or the skills upgrade for them will be the one that is also complements the kind of like technology upgrading that is associated with that kind of like shedding off. Because how we see it is that for every shedding of skills, it's not just about downsizing of a firm. It's about some kind of like technology taking over jobs and whatever. But if there is some kind of like skill scaling or whatever, then it could maybe help in terms of like skill capital complementarity of something of that sort. So that is how we would like to look at it. And of course, something that is also quite very important is perhaps a rigid labor market. So in one other studies that we did, whereby we are looking at the effect of global value chain on wage. So what we found out is that actually being integrated in global value chain, it leads to suppression of wage, especially in emerging and developing countries. So if I should push that kind of like analysis here, I will also kind of like suspect that at least if we have like some kind of like stringent labor market that prevents easy shedding off of workers, then this could also help in terms of like job retention among these older firms. So that would be my response to that.
Thank you, Gideon. And Anissa, you can come through. I think there's a comment in the chat session, and maybe you can just read it out to Gideon to answer.
No problem. So the first question is from Sisetu. He asks, can the prof share the type of manufacturing industries the firms use in the paper operate in? Also, what conclusions can be drawn between the type of manufacturing industry the firms operate in and their GVC integration, job creation, and job destruction, if this is significant in any way? I think I will stop there, Gideon, because I have 3 other questions. Maybe you want to just answer them, and then I can go ahead with the other 2, unless you'd like me to read all 4.
Yeah, okay. So let me start with the first one that has to do with the type of manufacturing. So our analysis is based on a panel data from 2009 to 2017, and it considers all kinds of manufacturing sectors. So if I should use the Isaac classification, so that would be from 15 to I think 37. So in this case, that will include the food, the beverages, the textiles, the tobaccos, down to medium high techs like the fabricated metals, to machineries and all this. So even recycling. So the analysis covers firms that cut across all these sectors. So that is the kind of the manufacturing firms that are covered in the analysis. So sorry, I don't know if I got the second question. You mind repeating?
No problem. Then he also said, what conclusions can be drawn between the type of manufacturing industry the firms operate in and their GVC integration, job creation, and job destruction, if this is significant in any way? That was the second question.
Yeah, so this is an insightful question. So unfortunately, our analysis is not industry specific. So what we use what we consider here is cross industry analysis. So we do not really, like, for instance, single out different industries to understand what kind of heterogeneities that we could that could emerge when we look at this industry versus this industry. In fact, our analysis includes sector fixed effects that kind of like absorbs all these kind of industry heterogeneities. So in other words, what our findings holds is like the average effect. So the average effect of a firm that are integrated in global value, an average effect of a manufacturing firm that is integrated into global value chain. So that is basically what we find in this study. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Gideon. Then I have another question from Alvis. He has got 3 questions. The first one is, was the analysis based on the cross-sectional or longitudinal design? That's his first question. The second question is, subject to the data available, would it be possible to control for the following co-founders during estimation? He says, 1, the specific industry in which sample firms operate. Then he says A, labor, and then he talks to capital, and then K, ratios of the respective firms. And then his last question is, has the robustness of the estimated model been tested in the results presented? If so, which specific parameters have been used, and what has been the outlook status of the results?
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Thank you. So just if you look at this table, table 10. So as you see, so in our analysis, we already control for things like, just as he asked, capital intensity, the wage per capita, the R&D intensity, and royal payments, including labor productivity. So we controlled for a whole, like a lot of firm characteristics, as which are these, and also industry characteristics like the industry demand, the industry competition, and also more broadly the trade openness of the sectors. So I would say that our analysis already controls for a bunch of firm and sector characteristics, in addition with the sector dummies that we include. So on that side, I dare to argue that our result is pretty robust on that. Now, based on the first question, also whether it's cross-sectional or longitudinal, I would say it's both, because here we are exploring variation across sectors and we are exploring variation across firms. Not necessarily within sectors, but at least across sectors. So in that case, we capture that dimension of the data in our analysis. And at the same time, these firms, the observation is kind of like repeated over years from 2009 to 2017. So I suppose that is also like longitudinal, if I would say that. Now, in terms of the robustness check, like I showed in the analysis, for us to address the endogeneity issue, which we suspect, we used a structural model that helps us to address these endogeneity issues. But of course, I must also confess that, of course, this is not perfect, because it does not perfectly solve the exclusion restriction assumption. And honestly, we are currently exploring options of a better identification strategy, but at least for the working paper version. So, and also because this was like a project that was funded, given the time we had to go to South Africa, this was what we were able to do. But currently, we are exploring other options to improve on the identification strategy in order to get the paper published. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Gideon. Yes, Elvis is saying he's satisfied with her question. He's well covered. thank you. I don't know if there are any other questions for the professor or comments.
I don't think there are any more. Thanks, Nobuntu.
Thank you, Anita. I think we have come to an end of our webinar. And please remember to rate your engagement with the webinar. I've put in the link on the chat where you can rate your experience via the link. And thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Have a great afternoon further. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, for
Thank you,
having me.
Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.